I'm Roshni, and I'm the director of PHutures, and it's a career and professional office for our PhDs and postdocs. And I work with a lot of students who are really interested in data science. So can you tell us a little bit about yourselves? And we'll start with you, Shantanu.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Roshni. Really, it's a pleasure to be here. So hi, everyone. I'm Shantanu. I'm a nuclear physicist / data scientist / machine learning engineer. And I've always tried, so I have sort of the sciencey part of me and the artsy part of me, and I've always tried to marry both of those in all my work. I started working at CERN during the second year of my PhD. Currently, I'm leading my third and final project there, and it will be wrapped up in the next few months. And so the three projects altogether tell a complete story of what happens in nuclear collisions, which we can get more into if anyone's interested at a later time. But so this holistic storytelling approach has always been important to me. And like it started with when I was little, I used to do a lot of creative writing. I had a writer's corner in high school, middle school, college. I learned physics and math through storytelling, taught it the same way. And nowadays it looks like, giving talks at conferences, being in panels like these ones, rallying my coworkers into, for a unified vision, and so on and so forth. And an added bonus is that I try to use my narrative to encourage and empower others to pursue STEM, especially women and other minorities. Yeah, and so working at being at CERN was certainly very exciting. I'd encourage anyone to give it a whirl. And another cool thing that I got to be a part of while I was there is a 3D IMAX movie, also meant to encourage younger people to pursue the sciences. So I'm happy to geek out about that as well later.
Very impressive. Thank you, Srita.
That was a beautiful intro, Sansuna. I have to start with saying I just love the fact that we're three women on the screen talking about data science and STEM. So I'm really excited about that. So thanks for having me here as well. A little bit about me. I think just at a high level, I love the way Shantanu introduced herself. So I'm going to follow suit on that part. I think at a high level, curiosity and truth-seeking have been like a very consistent theme in my life, and I'm not surprised where that has led me to at this point. And so I feel like there's been a lot of interest in math and sciences right from a pretty young age, and that permitted engineering undergrad and a MS and PhD in engineering and quantitative sciences. And after my engineering, I've kind of was gravitating towards data science. We'll talk more about kind of that career journey, etc. But I've been at Uber for about 3 years now, and working in different parts of the company. Other than working, I'm a huge lover of reading as well. I don't read as much as I'd like, but I like what I read. And I do dabble a little bit in writing and storytelling. So I see a few themes already coming up in the call. So looking forward to chat more.
Thank you. These are very different introductions from our other PhD chats. So very grateful for the storytelling element. Speaking about the storytelling element, I want to go back to the beginning of the story. When you guys were contemplating your different career moves and your next steps, can you tell us what your thought processes were when you were in academia? What were you thinking about going into? How did you land on data science? And Srita, you had the mic last, so I'll go with you first.
Yeah, totally. So for me, it was actually a very interesting transition. So I think I finished my undergrad in India. And I definitely have this feeling that, I need to spend more. I mean, I didn't feel ready to contribute to this world, like as simple as it was. I just felt like I had to study more. I had to understand some of the areas I was working on. And I started dabbling in transportation engineering in my undergrad. And so the nice thing about transportation engineering is it's a very broad area. So they were like, you could be doing something as diverse as, working with econometrics for choice modeling, working with aviation, working with kind of differential equations for traffic flow and things of that sort. So it sounded like a good area to just like get my feet wet. I went to Berkeley for a master's. And it was an easy transition for me as a choice because it was a funded master's. So for me, it was just like a very easy jump to make in that sense. So that definitely helped me choose that path. And once I got there, I remember I was graduating and I was planning to go for the consulting job. And I took a course just for fun, out of curiosity, called Introduction to Machine Learning. And I just, that course just like changed literally my entire decision. Like I kind of stopped the job search, didn't accept the offers, changed my master's to a PhD. And I was like, I just have to study more. And I want to do a PhD that is applied machine learning and statistics. And so I focused on aviation air traffic control methods. And then after that, I was thinking, okay, I have a fork. And then I did an internship to figure out like what I wanted to do more. And then I just was absolutely sure that that data science is what I wanted to follow in an industry role. So that led me to Uber. And the transportation kind of connection made it like very obvious as that choice for me.
Yeah, as a physicist, Shantana, what was your decision-making process to get into data science, and so why data science?
Yeah, $1 million questions. So I was already doing data science by doing physics. I was architecting data science solutions on these massive data sets coming out of CERN to uncover rare signals. So a lot of statistics and all of those things were already part of my workflow. So it was a pretty obvious choice to go into sort of machine learning and data science more broadly in the industry. But I'd like to say that even if I weren't a CERN physicist, just by going through the rigmarole of the scientific training, learning about the scientific method, learning how to design experiments, how to conduct them, how to like check for mistakes or check for like little things that might have been overseen, like that whole process is very well suited for data science. So even if you haven't worked with data per se, and you probably have, then data science it can be right for you. Data science is not just about data. And as far as transition, I'll just add really quickly from my PhD to industry transition. That process was difficult. It involved deep introspection. Because I started thinking about it in my 4th year, and that happens to be the time when you're most productive at your work, at your research work as a PhD student. It's also when you have the largest network within the field. You're going to all these conferences and meeting everyone. Everyone knows who you are. So it's particularly okay. Yeah, there's definitely an option there. Some of the reasons I sort of veered more towards industry is the pain points of academia also started to reveal themselves to me a bit more. Wide range of things, right? Like especially within STEM or in physics, there's systematic sexism. There are some, there are lots of different issues, and they sort of, as they surfaced more and more, and also realizing that teaching has always been something that has given me a lot of joy. But at a large research institute that takes research first, often the quality of teaching is sacrificed in favor of the quality of research. So I just found this dichotomy that you want to go to a smaller school so that you get that attention, you get a good education, but then you want to go and work at a larger school where you're not sort of, feeding back into the, the good education system. So overall, those were some of the reasons that I was like, yeah, I don't think academia is for me.
Absolutely, and everyone has their own sort of reasons and reasoning as they make their life decisions. When it comes to data science, and you guys applied and went through that whole process, there are several hundred applicants for each data science job. Like when you look at LinkedIn jobs itself, you see so many applicants. What would you recommend to do to be a standout applicant? And Srita, will start with you and then move on to Shantanu.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I would say the most important thing that I would recommend is actually using your network. I have personally given this advice to everyone who's thinking of job hunting, which is like minimize applying online, because it sometimes can end up being a black hole that you don't have a lot of like visibility on. If to the extent possible, I highly encourage like reaching out to your network, understanding what the role is, getting a better sense of what you're applying to. And of course, it's more intensive an effort, but I think it pays off much. The ROI is much higher from that perspective. And the other advice I give, I know it's not very useful right now, but the other advice I give is actually tech talks, trying to be a part of industry tech talks, industry events, because that's where you can actually create a lot of meaningful networking, meaningful conversations. In fact, the person who referred me to Uber was actually a person I met at a tech talk given by Uber, by women in data at Uber, which I'm a part of right now inside. But it's about creating those meaningful interactions and meaningful connections, and then leveraging them to understand what roles are available, what does it mean to work there, and then actually taking that help in making decisions as well.
And Shantanu, you do leverage your network. You're very active when it comes to sort of putting content out there on LinkedIn and building upon that network. Did you do much of that during your PhD, or did you do that when you entered sort of the job market? When should someone start their networking process? How soon in their PhD should they be thinking about that?
That is a great question. As early as possible, as early as you feel comfortable getting out there, putting yourself out there. And it's also it's a practice thing, right? Like, you are not going to feel as comfortable in the beginning, and with as you get the positive reinforcement, it'll become easier. I started being properly active in LinkedIn just last October, which was after I finished my PhD, and I was already sort of talking to a couple of places. And I just, was very, very diligent about it. I wasn't even thinking that it was something that I had to do. It was more, I was having a lot of fun. I was meeting a lot of people. The other side of networking, and again, this is hard right now, but is meeting people at conferences, attending those conferences, making yourself part of the conversation. You do that virtually on something like LinkedIn, and you should also do that like physically and in person. And I also started doing that very heavily fairly early on. So yeah, I would very much recommend to be active on LinkedIn, to reach out to people, to engage them in discussions. It's not just about like adding people and wanting to grow your network. It's about making those meaningful connections.
So in addition to the networking component, how would you recommend one transfer their academic skill sets into industry positions, particularly that in data science? And Shantanu, you can start.
Yeah, so the skill set question is a little bit tricky, right? So what I ended up seeing is that the skills that were most valuable to my people who were interviewing me turned out to be my problem-solving abilities, my communication skills, my curiosity and eagerness to take initiative. These are sort of almost like personality traits, but they are really skills because you can hone them and you can develop them. So I definitely think that these in some sense, less technical skills are actually the much more important ones and more highly valued ones, rather than, like coding or XYZ. So I would definitely encourage everyone to focus on those skills more.
Yeah, and Srita, in addition to the gems that Shantanu just shared with us, would you be able to speak from your international students' perspective? How do you leverage sort of being an international student and transfer those broad experiences that you come with? Can you shed a little bit of a light on that as well?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. So I would say being an international student helped me much more in questioning assumptions in industry. I think for a lot of companies that are headquartered in San Francisco, for example, there's a lot of San Francisco first approach about problem solving. And of course, like there's a lot you can get from a rigorous training, rigorous background, but there's like just a lot of, again, curiosity and a lot of like questioning assumptions that comes from having a diverse background, which is why diversity has always been such an important indicator for success. So as an international student, when there were decisions being made at Uber about any products, about any algorithms, I've always kind of questioned like, hey, is this the right thing to do? Like, will this actually work better? What about this new idea that is probably out of context for other backgrounds?
Yeah, that's key. You just mentioned it. When you work in tech for example, like the two of you do, diversity is what moves innovation forward. Shantanu, someone had a question for you. How do I balance, as you did, theoretical study during PhD? And you may or may not have had more of a theoretical component, but how do you manage theoretical study with practical skills needed in industry? You touched upon a little bit, part of it is personality, but for those that need a little bit of practice on honing those skills, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so the short version is that don't think of yourself as a theoretical person just because you've been doing research, right? Find the aspects of your work that most closely resemble data science. Data science is a very broad discipline. There's different parts of it. So find the parts and areas where you do have skills that directly transfer and align. And if you recognize that there's room for improvement, then work on those. But you already have some of those skills, so you can just build on top of that. So I think that's a very important one. And every data scientist does something different. So again, it's not a well-boxed kind of field. So just sort of finding the niche is very important. And then one necessary skill that is often lacking in academics transitioning is thinking about the business impact. And I know this sounds a little bit scary and sort of like, okay, I'm a scientist. How do I start to think about business? But business impact doesn't mean the things that you learn in business school or an MBA. It doesn't mean like having business intuition. How do I maximize some ROI or something? It's about how your work fits into the overall goal of the company. And you've been thinking about that, all throughout, right? You've been thinking about how your work fits into your field, fits into the work your PI is interested in. If you're part of a collaboration like I am, then how your work contributes to that. And that is business impact. You have to make sure that it's aligned with your company's eventual goals. And by knowing how your contribution contributes to the overall goal, you're showing, even as you speak about your own research and your academic experience, you're showing the interviewer that you're able to think in that way already, even if you don't use these business words, even if you don't translate it directly yet.
Absolutely. And I, in the first 15 minutes, I've heard you both say, and I haven't asked this question directly, is that you don't have to be a hardcore data scientist to get into data science. So particular questions are, is it a benefit to me if I have a math background? And two, do I have to be a statistician to get a data science job? I think I can answer that now is no, right? You don't necessarily have to be in any of those categories. So can you explain to me, in your experience as data scientists, who are all data scientists? What backgrounds do people have that can help them transition into sort of data science? Srita?
Yeah, great question. A huge plus one to Shantanu's thoughts about the previous question, which I think allude to a lot of this question as well. I think data science is it's a very versatile area. Like data science is literally science on data, and we actually work with data in every quantitative field. So if you're working in even like history recently has become like more data intensive. So I actually beg to differ that data science is a specific field that you have to have a specific, like a degree in that specific field. Even like, at Uber and other tech companies, when we're looking for candidates, it's like all job descriptions say PhD in any quantitative fields like economics, statistics, machine learning, computer science. So I think quantitative is the key, is the fact that you're capable of working with statistical frameworks and solving real world problems. I think that's the basic thing. And more generally, I think this answers why we don't need a data science, a particular data science degree. But I do want to add one point that it often helps. Like if there are a bunch of, like if the person's, if there's a huge amount of choices that someone's making and everything else is the same, literally that like everything else is control. There's only one difference, which is like the exact degree. And someone sees that you have a degree in like, let's say computer science or machine learning versus a degree in like a little bit of more pure sciences. It might sometimes, in like proportions impact. So I'm not denying the advantage of one degree versus the other, but I don't think it's a deciding factor.
Correct, which is where I suppose when you have your varied experiences, your experience was with data, then you add the networking component, then you add a little bit of coursework, then you can sort of diversify your portfolio. And so Shantanu, when it comes to diversifying your portfolio, say I'm a biomedical scientist trying to get into data science now, what are things that I can do now, actionable steps during my PhD that I could do in order to make that transition into a data science role?
Yeah, so again, I think a good starting point is identifying what you're doing already that most closely resembles data science. I think that will A, give you the confidence that you have done something similar before, and B, it's always nice to have something to start from. The other thing about, like, as you're starting to think about if this is a good fit for me or not, if I want to go into data science or not, you should ask why you're interested in data science, and like specifically what about it excites you, right? Maybe it's a certain aspect of data science that excites you. Maybe you're just mostly excited about, figuring out the statistical confidence of, some data analysis, right? Then you can really focus on those aspects. And then in terms of, preparing, so I did it maybe a little bit unconventionally. So because I was working with data at CERN, and I had experience with, sort of the end-to-end process of data science, I wasn't really going from, I wasn't really thinking of myself as, oh yeah, I need to learn all of these data science skills. So I didn't, for instance, I didn't take any additional courses. I didn't do any of the boot camps. I actually also did not do any code interview practice on Lead Code. Now there's like, that doesn't mean that that's the right way to do it. There's certainly like a lot of data science interviews are geared towards testing like these little, or like using these little, Lead Code type questions to sort of figure out if you have the software chops or not, which, I mean, in my opinion, is not the right way to do it. But the reason one of the big reasons that I didn't want to practice doing that is because I wasn't sure I wanted to work at a place where they're evaluating data scientists, or whether or not you'll be able to be a good data scientist on whether you can, find a subset of an array that satisfied some condition. I wanted to, show what I could do with data. And so I ended up the most advanced stages that I got to, the offers that I got, they were all with companies that really emphasized working with data and problem solving in that interview process, rather than just, coding in some sense.
Okay, and going along with what you just said, someone sent me a question asking, do you suggest doing Kaggle competitions or a data science project of our own, or training programs like Insight Data Science? And either of you could answer this if you have any experience. Kaggle competitions, data science project of our own, or training program like Insight Data Science?
Okay, I'll go first real quick. I would say definitely project of your own is great. Kaggle is great just for getting that project, getting the data, figuring out what would be something interesting to get from the data, looking at existing solutions to see how people are thinking, and then building on top of that. Maybe you want to demonstrate your production and productionizing abilities. It's not really about necessarily coming up with the best solution yourself. It's always collaborative. So Kaggle, I wouldn't say that like if you become Kaggle grandmaster or whatever, that is what you should try to go for, but it is definitely a perfectly fine place to find those interesting problems to solve. And again, so that feeds into your own projects is a great way to go. Again, I didn't do a boot camp. I don't have a strong opinion on them one way or the other. But so I think it's a personal judgment for judgment call for everyone. I don't think I would be if and when I am hiring people or interviewing people, I don't think I would really care too much about whether or not their resume had boot camp.
Yeah,
Sweeta?
so the points I would add to it is I think the most important aspect of preparing, like for yourself for a job interview and things of that sort, is demonstrating end-to-end capability of going from ideation to execution to impact estimation, and working with cross-functional stakeholders in productionizing things. So I think this is like the full spectrum of things that people would be looking at through different interviews and different sets of questions. So I would say try to take a problem, and this is something I really advise people coming for interviews is take a problem that you're seeing in an app that you or in a company that you're interviewing for. You know, I work at Uber, so I can't help mentioning that a lot. But let's say you're applying for the matching team at Uber, and you're like, okay, if that's the team I want to get into, think as much as possible. Okay, what are all the questions that they have? Look at the blog post and pick a problem and really go deep into that. Okay, so I need to figure out the best matching algorithm that minimizes something, maximizes something. Like frame a very clear, precise mathematical problem from an abstract problem statement. And once you do that, the next step is what's the data you would need? How would you go about getting that data? What's the instrumentation needed for that? So really think like you have the job of designing something for that company. How would you go about end to end? And then how would you productionize that? So then that's where causal inference comes in, experimentation comes in, impact metric definitions come in. Like, so that will help you go through the entire process, and that's invaluable. And that's very often what is tested in most interview processes. And my only caution to doing unilateral mediums is sometimes you can become an expert at very specific things, but fail in that end-to-end process. So for example, if you're just doing Kaggle as your main source of learning, then you already have this really well-defined problem statement for you. You have the data for you. You just have to apply some, and I'm not just saying you just have to, but it's like a subset of the problem. You have to apply a few models, try out a few numbers. You have pretty consistent metrics, predefined metrics to evaluate against. So it's a kind of artificially created problem, which is not representative of how industry and data science would look like. So you get really good at that, but then you're missing all the abstract problem solving practice that comes before it, and then the impact generation metrics and working with cross-functional stakeholders kind of aspects after that. So try to make sure that you are having a diversity in the kind of methods you're taking that cover all parts of this process.
You're both dropping just pearls of wisdom on us today. Thank you for blessing this call. A question from the audience: what would you say are the top necessary skills to be successful now that you are data scientists in working in industry, to be successful as a data scientist? So the other side of the pond, what would you say the top 3 necessary skills are? And I'll stick with 3 for now. Shantanu?
Oh man, when you figure it out, let me know, please. I rely heavily on communication, asking questions. You know, if I'm unclear on a problem that I've been tasked to solve, really talking to every single person who might touch that problem, might touch the solution that I'll be creating, to really define what I need to be doing. You know, we're used to solving nebulous problems as researchers, as PhDs and postdocs, but often it kind of remains nebulous for a long time. Like the deadlines are kind of longer. You have this big task that you're gonna do, and it's gonna get you your PhD, but you never really break it down into little bits in a strategic way. So thinking strategically, one of the things that is different in industry is that breakup does exist, and you can collaborate with others to come up with, you know, the little chunks, the bite-sized pieces that you can then tackle. So, and whenever there's confusion, yeah, I just fall back on asking questions and communicating very openly about where I'm at and what I need. And I think that's going to be key going forward. But again, I am not, you know, I've just started my journey. So I started as a machine learning engineer at Directly last month. So it's pretty early stages for me still.
Yeah, and Srita, you may have a couple of two more points to add to that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think just want to clarify that what is necessary to make you successful depends on different, like it varies over different stages of your career, for sure. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on entry-level positions, entry-level career paths. The one thing that I think is a bigger shock in industry that is very important to success is actually iteration. I think we all from academia come with this idea of perfection, of like going 100% into problem solving, like finishing the whole problem and going for like the very last sliver of incremental improvements that takes like 2x the amount of time to get to go from where you started to where you got. And so I think in industry it's very helpful, and it'll really help you succeed if you can keep this idea of iteration and really try to get to 80% ASAP, and kind of work like check with your business cross with your stakeholders, with your cross-functional stakeholders. What is the expectation from this project? And very often 80% is really good enough. So if you can keep that mindset to like, okay, what is the expectation, and making sure that you're not going for a perfection and under-delivering on the timelines and things of that sort, I think that's a huge indicator for success that sometimes is not very intuitive, given a lot of the backgrounds that we come from.
Thank you. So we're at the 30-minute mark. So if you have any more questions, like people are sending me questions privately, definitely ask in the chat box. Let me go to the second half of this talk, which is getting really into the application interview process, but also a typical day. Let's start with a typical day of a data scientist. Srita, can you just tell us, without going into your actual work, what does a typical day look like? So if I'm transitioning, what should I expect?
Yeah, for sure. So a typical day for data scientist would be So there's a fair amount of variability based on what stage of the project you're in. But I'm going to just give you like an average of all the days, like an average split of all the days. I think the very first part is problem solving, which is like scoping a problem. Like you always get a question from your business stakeholders, like, hey Shrita, we're observing a decline in user retention, or we're seeing a decline in user participation, something of that sort, a high level problem, and then they're like, okay, how do we fix this, or what's the headroom here? How can we improve this? Kind of going from that abstract problem statement to a mathematical question is like often a pretty hard process, and it doesn't seem hard, but it's actually like a huge deal breaker. And once we scope that problem clearly and set the goals, set the metrics, set the expectations and stuff, the next step is obviously working with the data. Data is never clean, never neat. There's a fair amount of time spent on just instrumentation sometimes on data cleaning, sometimes on data analysis, exploratory analysis and things like that, to get a sense of how to proceed from there. And then there's time spent next on prototyping. I personally think that prototyping is a huge part, like it's a really important part of your role as a DS, because the better you can prototype, the faster you can do it, the faster you basically get to the implementation part. And then once you have a prototype, you have interesting results, you work with your stakeholders, to product engineers, product managers, to productionize that and experiment. So this experimentation becomes really important. And then once you experiment, you have impact metrics and then monitoring. So it kind of depends on the project stage, but this is like a snapshot, a temporal snapshot in some sense. And then you work on multiple projects at the same time. So you're doing like different parts for different projects. And then there's obviously team cultural stuff like mentorship, working with other team members, collaborating and things of that sort. That's always fun.
And so you can easily work from home as well. Was the pandemic sort of a huge transition otherwise, or were you already working from home before?
No, so I've been mainly working in the office before the pandemic. I would say there are a few things. I think things have changed with working completely remotely for sure. There are certain aspects that are good, there are certain aspects that are bad with every change that comes in. But I think we have been working pretty effectively. Zoom is, I think the biggest thing I miss is like the joy of personal interactions. I feel like Zoom interactions are significantly more transactional than like in person, hey, what's up, like having organic discussions, organic ideas flow. So I think we just need to do a better job at creating that kind of an organic conversation, please. But we're able to work efficiently for sure.
So Shantanu, you might enjoy this question because I've seen a lot of content on this topic. Now we're going to talk about, I'm looking for a job. I see a job description on LinkedIn Jobs or whatever on a website, and I don't exactly fit the job description, but I'm pretty close and I can spin it. What would be your advice to get my resume past sort of the ATS system, the website, to be seen? Okay, so how do I get an interview at this point?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. Let me start with the resume side of things. So your resume is a sales document. This is often repeated. It is a very true statement. So let me give you a very concrete example in how thinking of it as a sales document might change your the way you're thinking. So as a graduate student, what is your title? Graduate student researcher, maybe teaching assistant, some variation of that. That doesn't tell a person reading your resume anything about what you're doing. So your title should represent what you're actually doing. And certainly the description as well should go into projects you've actually worked on and the skills you've actually developed. So when I was applying to jobs, my even just having finished my PhD, my title wasn't graduate student researcher on my resume. My title was data science architect, because that's what I was doing. I was architecting end-to-end data science solutions, and I talked about every part of that process in bullet points in my resume. So that's a big thing. Use words that are impactful. It's not necessarily just about like action words versus passive words. It's also about like what, I mean, action words are good, like, it sets a different tone for the resume, but also words that will resonate with the people reading. And that doesn't just mean like buzzwords, or it doesn't mean buzzwords. It's just the kinds, and okay, I'm talking a little vaguely right now, but maybe we can discuss that later. So anyway, the resume is extremely powerful. And leveraging it is extremely important to get that first interview for sure. I did not optimize my resume for ATSs. This is this is just my opinion. There's a lot of different opinion on this out there. But my thought process is that, and the ATSs are older systems that are, and I think we should move away from them a bit more. There are ways to hack ATSs, and it's like, it sort of encourages conformity. I would much rather have a resume that spoke more to me about my, my personal experiences. Like I saw a resume the other day that had like My Little Pony theme, and it was like, yeah, I would read that resume. It's it's genuinely exciting to read. So that's the sort of the resume part of it, and really the most important takeaway is make sure that you communicate well in your resume what you have been doing and what skills you think will transfer over to the job. It's no secret that job descriptions will have more requirements than are actually required. So there is the, sometimes people break it into must-haves and good-to-haves. Definitely the good-to-haves are highly negotiable. Even the must-to-haves are sometimes pretty squishy as well. And certainly like years of experience and things like that, how are you defining experience, right? Like as a graduate student, you have 5-6 years of experience. I mean, those are counted as years of experience for sure, because you've been doing meaningful work. You're getting paid for it, and in so many different ways, it's years of experience. So definitely just be confident about what you have done. Really communicate that well in your resume, and don't shy away from, don't stick to predefined formats of what to and to not to include in your resume.
Would you include in that piece of advice reaching out to recruiters on your own while you're looking for a particular company that you're targeting? Do you recommend doing that, being proactive about that as well?
Yeah. So in the last couple of months before I signed on with my current company, I was definitely getting and doing interviews mostly just through like reaching out to people. And so, okay, I should clarify something. I wasn't interested in working for a big company, so I didn't really apply to the major companies, or even any company bigger than like 500 to 600 people. So I was very focused on these mid-sized startups, which are usually typically easier to reach someone in fairly, So it's not. I didn't always reach out to the recruiter. I sometimes reached out to the CEO or the VP of engineering, or XYZ person, and I was getting all those interviews, and so that's sort of you're already standing out in some sense. That was a big one, yeah. And I would encourage you to reach out to recruiters. The only thing is that it does doesn't necessarily differentiate you. So they're getting a bunch of resumes. Let's say they also get yours. And then in addition, you've sent them like a LinkedIn connection or message or something. A lot of other people are doing that too. So it's not the biggest differentiator.
Yeah, it's a trifecta of being able to tailor your resume to the job description. So having a nice package, a marketing material that's you, then networking, and then, sort of having that conversation. So someone asks, did you include research papers on your resume as well? Is that important as you're transitioning either to smaller or larger companies? Srita?
Yeah, I definitely encourage putting research papers on your resume. I think you're trying to show them that you have a good experience going from abstract, as I said, I'm going from abstract ideas to like high impact results. And I think research papers are very indicative of you being able to kind of go through a pretty elaborate process and put together a well documented, well communicated, especially in more prestigious journals. Like I think it's a very strong signal for someone pursuing a PhD. So I highly encourage people to put their publications, especially the top. You can just say, if you don't want to put a lot of publications, you can say top publications or select publications, something of that sort, to show some of your like best work.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So let's, in the last 15, 20 minutes, let's move on to what people want to know about interview and the interview process. Can you each tell us a little bit about how you prepared for the interview process? So your resume was great, you got the call, you were visible, a recruiter was able to reach out to you, had this conversation. So how do you prepare for the interview process? Does that include coding aspects to it too during your interview? What was your, just really briefly, your brief experience about the interview process? And Shantana, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so again, I didn't really practice the coding part that much. I also treated my interviews as as preparing for interviews. So I would encourage anyone to start applying early, get those interviews, get that practice. You will both discover what works and what doesn't work for you, and also whether or not, like, what kinds of companies might be a good fit for you. So it's a great process for learning about yourself as well as what's on the other side. For advanced stages in the interview process, I would say definitely understand what the company is doing, understand the space. That doesn't necessarily mean the competitors or anything, but like really what are the company's products? What is the value that they're adding to the world? And a good way to do this is sort of find all the public facing things that they've put out, not necessarily just the website, but like, has the CEO been giving talks? How do they frame their journey, and work that into your narrative as well. The whole thing is about storytelling, right? You want to show what value you would add to the company. You can't really do that without understanding what the company does and how they want the value to be added. So definitely understanding what, and so goes beyond Crunchbase and Glassdoor and all of those things. It really goes into looking at what the company is putting out there.
Okay. Srita, anything additional to add to the interview process?
Yeah, so I would say I focused on a few parts of interview practice. For like in the companies that I applied for, which were like, I think I focus on, I really want to go with bigger companies. So more of the kind of like the other, like the larger tech companies. And I think coding is important, especially not software engineer level coding, but prototype level coding. Like you should be able to prototype ideas into like quick solutions. So I definitely practiced coding beyond the graduate student level for these interviews, and I used LeetCode for that. Not very advanced questions, but I think like easy and medium questions until I just felt comfortable being on a screen, on a whiteboard, just putting out lines of logic and being able to iterate very fast and think through, okay, like how can I improve something? What am I missing out and things? So that's, I didn't want to feel stumped when I was being asked to code up something on the spot. So it's more of a practice for that and just kind of getting into the attitude of like just putting lines of code for a problem. So definitely recommend that if you're aiming for bigger companies. The other thing I also would recommend is case study. And case study is not a consulting case study, but more of a data science case study. So I think I alluded to this a little bit before, but if you're going to a company, think about the products that they're making, think about think about the team that you're joining in many cases, and think about what problems are they solving. There are very often blog posts around it. There are very often the job description will give you clear examples. They should, and very often give you very clear examples of the problems that you'll be solving. Pick up a few problems and really brainstorm through them. Like work with a friend and kind of like go end to end on solving that problem. Like, for example, in a job description that I put out recently, I said like, hey, in this role, you'd be designing a new loyalty program for Uber. So like, that's a huge question. Like, how would you solve that? How would you go about this end to end? So that's literally how a lot of interviews are. So practice, every time you're going to a company that you really care about, practice those data science case studies. Think about experimentation is I think a huge part of what people don't think very often about. To think through what experimentation designs are relevant for what kind of productionization, A/B testing, synthetic control, like time series analysis. Like, what are the pros and cons of different things? Again, tons of really good blogs in different companies about this. It should be easy to find. And then think a little bit about just your own, your own work attitude. What are things that I think people sometimes completely ignore this. I'm not saying this is like this will define you in your interview, but I think doing a poor job here definitely takes points off, and sometimes can be a deal breaker if there's a cultural if there's a lack of cultural fit. I think it's a huge thing. So think a little bit about your past experience, what you've learned, issues where things where you had a conflict, how did you resolve that? I think as a data scientist in industry, there is a huge focus on working cross-functionally. So reflect a little bit on your cross-functional interactions you've had, and try to think about like what are the challenges you had, what did you do well, where can you improve? I think it's important to be well prepared, just even for yourself, on like how you fare in these different things.
Absolutely. So you're validating what I, as a career office, often mention is practice your interviews, prepare for it, write down the questions, the behavioral interview questions. They're pretty standard sometimes they can be different, but practice, think about it before you go into the interview. So preparation is what you mentioned, that was key. A completely off topic question, but I have to get to it because multiple people asked it. R or Python or both?
I love Python. I've never really given R a shot. I also code in C++, so whatever works.
I would say I was more of an R person in undergrad, and in grad school, and like little Python, more R. And as I moved to industry, I've kind of completely gone off R, and I'm only Python. And I've definitely seen this trend across different industries where Python is, just a more communal preferred language than R is. There are people who still use R. That generally, it does not, R versus Python does not get you out of an interview for sure. That I feel very confident about, especially for bigger companies. But like in industry, I think there's more inclination towards Python.
Okay. Coming back to sort of the flow of questions, and you guys, the way in which these things work is like I have one eye on the time, one eye in the chat box, and one eye on the guests. So if I haven't asked any specific smaller questions, I was trying to get the big picture first. Definitely, Sarita and Shantanu have both said that they're open to receiving messages on LinkedIn and answering any questions. And if it's any career related, I'm here. That's my job as well. So I just wanted to ask you big picture questions and future plans. What does career growth look like for the both of you? And Sarita, where can I go? Because you went from data scientist to senior data scientist. What's next?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've always been, I think one of the favorite parts about being a data scientist for me is working with incredibly smart people and just learning constantly from the job. And I think that has really shaped a lot of how I think about my career growth. And in the numerous interactions I've had with people, I've realized that what makes me really happy is scaling impact, not just through my work, but through the work of other people. So I have been transitioning more and more into kind of taking the lead roles, managing people, managing projects and teams. So that's definitely a very feasible career growth option. And I think as you make progress, you in many tech companies, there's a very clear and a really nice path to go, in the management side. in actually the completely purely technical individual contributor side, and even in the middle where you're individual contributor and you're leading a couple of people or you're leading a project, you're a tech lead or something like that. So I think it's obviously a very personally driven decision, and it's based on what makes you happy. If it's like writing really complicated, like creating complicated solutions and productionizing things, and it's like about making things work, then obviously I think an IC, which is an individual contributor role, is more appropriate. But if I think you're observing, you derive more and more passion through scaling impact, through people, through leading more, through like working through more people, then I think a management track makes more sense.
Yeah, I think you were going along with what you were saying earlier, was figure out what your values are as a person as well, and then bring that into the decision-making process. Shantanu, what's your goals for the next 5-10 years? If goals ever work, what would be your sort of vision for your own career?
Yeah, I'm also a very big picture person. So with the team that I lead at CERN, it involves project management. It involves sort of, there's a lot of it's a tech lead kind of position as well, like speccing out the solution, and making sure that things get turned out in the right way. So there are sort of different aspects to it that are managerial, even though they're not directly people management. Although, I mean, there's naturally some aspect of that. And I've really enjoyed that. So I definitely see myself going into managerial type roles. Now, I don't necessarily just want to manage people. I want to set direction. So that's sort of where I think I'm headed. But I think it's good to think about these things. But as you're transitioning into industry, the first step is almost definitely going to be IC role as a data scientist or MLE. And I think it's a great place to start for either career track, for sure, because you definitely don't want to be sort of managing people that you have no idea what they're doing, right? You have to have those tech chops as well.
And maybe you know the answer to this, or maybe you don't, but how do you foresee the impact of COVID-19 on the data science hiring in the market? If you have any insights on that as well, Srita?
Yes. So I think, I'm of course, like, don't quote me on this, but I want to say that we're probably starting to see an uptick again in hiring across companies. Obviously, we've seen some really unfortunate events in the recent past with hiring and retention and stuff of that sort. But I want to say that just from looking at data with different companies, that we're getting back into a hiring state again. So it's going to be much harder for sure. The positions would be like fewer than before. I'm not going to be hiding that fact. The growth is much flatter in that perspective, but I think hiring freeze is behind us, like a strict hiring freeze. Like, it's obviously going to be more strategic and more very strongly thought about across different companies, but I think it's still possible.
Shantanu, in the last few minutes, if there was one piece of advice you could leave us with today, that grad students and postdocs in this call, for those thinking about going into data science, what would that one piece of advice be? And I'll get your views, each of your views on that.
There's a question that I want to briefly address, which is what do I do if I get an offer before I've graduated? And I think this is an important one to touch on. Let your PI know that you have this thing, you have this real option. You're not just looking or just transitioning, and ask them what is required of me for you to feel comfortable giving me that degree. A lot of the times as PhD students will do a lot more than they technically need to, if that makes sense. Like, there are long PhDs, 7-8 years sometimes. Sometimes people use it as a like holding ground before making a transition. So having that offer in hand or prospects in hand is actually a really powerful thing for you to put end date on your PhD or your postdoc. And there's no reason to keep at this, stay in this sort of transient or transitional role, right, where you're not really compensated well for your efforts any longer than you need to. So that's why I say, like, you know, kind of do the bare minimum in some sense. No one's going to give you a PhD for free. So do what's required, then move on. Oh, sorry. And then, yeah, advice, you said like just general word.
Yeah, general advice for someone right now as they're thinking about transitioning. What would one piece of advice, top piece of advice be?
Know yourself. Yeah, figure out what you want to do. It's a bi-directional thing. You have to be a good fit for the company, but the company also has to be a good fit for you. So
Yeah.
make sure you don't settle.
So the question is, when it comes down to know yourself, is ask questions, get curious about what the answers could be, talk to people. LinkedIn is a treasure trove of people, which is where I found the two of you as well, the treasures. So talk to people, right? Shrita, what else would you add to that?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm going to be more specific to the current situation of COVID and how, like, thinking about moving data science and that, like, getting a job in that perspective. I would say, like, the big advice I have is don't be picky when applying. Be picky when choosing your offers. So I see a lot of people being extremely picky in applying, and it very often goes against them, especially in situations which are more challenging, like right now. So I would say, like, you know, that very often I advise people to think about, create a spreadsheet and have like your dream companies that you would just like go on the blink of an eye, companies you would join, but they're not your dream companies, you'd be happy in them, companies you would like join but not too happy about it, you wish you did better, and then like everything else, right? So I would generally say, you know, generally the three categories might be enough, but I would actually recommend like apply a little bit more aggressively given the condition, as much as your time can permit, and be picky once you get the offers, so that you have enough time, you've thought in advance to create sufficient leads for yourself. And you know, it's in a situation like this, I would say that survival is the most important thing. It's not obviously ideal for all of us, for any of us at this point, especially people looking for jobs and graduating. So, you know, in the worst case, even if you have to settle for something that's not ideal for you, it's okay. It's really going to be a short-term thing. There are ways that this is going to get better. So that's kind of my advice.
Yeah, you're saying be flexible, which is
Yeah.
a very valid piece of advice. So it's 4 o'clock. I've already gotten comments privately saying this has been so insightful. They've been so happy that you two were the guests. So I thank you for being so honest and candid and open. I'm sorry if I didn't get into the small questions that I should have, you know, that were on the list that you submitted.